Have you ever wondered why you can meditate for hours, practice gratitude daily, and optimize your morning routine to perfection, yet still feel fundamentally anxious about your healthcare costs, and whether you'll ever afford a home? Have you noticed how every solution offered for your stress, your burnout, and your mental health struggles comes with a price tag and a promise that if you just work harder on yourself, everything will be fine? What if I told you that this isn't a coincidence, but rather the predictable result of a systematic transformation of social problems into individual purchasing opportunities? The wellness industry has become a $42 billion marketplace that promises to solve your deepest anxieties through personal transformation. Yet, anxiety rates continue to skyrocket across all demographics. Depression affects over 21 million adults annually, while the wellness market grows by 5 to 10% each. This isn't a failure of the wellness industry. It's exactly how it was designed to function under the economic principles that Milton Friedman championed, principles that systematically transform collective problems into individual market opportunity. When Milton Friedman argued that individual responsibility should replace collective action, when he insisted that private markets could solve problems more efficient than public institutions, when he promoted the idea that your personal choices determine your life outcomes regardless of structural constraints, he wasn't just describing economic theory. He was laying the intellectual groundwork for a system that would eventually turn your mental health, your spiritual well-being, and your basic human needs into profitable market segments. The wellness industry represents the ultimate expression of Friedman's vision, a marketplace where systemic failures become individual purchasing decisions, where collective solutions are replaced by personal consumption, and where social justice is rebranded as inner peace. Today, I am going to reveal 7 specific mechanisms through which the wellness industry operates as a sophisticated system of social control, channeling your legitimate frustrations with an unjust system into harmless individual practices that generate profit while leaving the underlying structures completely intact. You'll discover how meditation apps distract from collective organizing, how self-care culture replaces mutual aid, how personal development substitutes for political development, and how the promise of inner transformation becomes a substitute for actual social transformation. By the end of this analysis, you'll understand why no amount of personal wellness can solve problems that are fundamentally structural, and you will see clearly how the wellness industry functions as a pressure valve that releases social tension without addressing social causes. The first mechanism through which wellness culture serves systemic control is what I call the individualization engine, the systematic process by which collective problems are reframed as personal deficiencies requiring individual solution. This represents the direct application of Friedman's methodological individualism, his core belief that all social phenomena can be explained through individual choices and personal responsibility. In wellness culture, this manifests as the persistent message that your anxiety is your problem to solve, your depression is your challenge to overcome, and your stress is your responsibility to manage. Consider how environmental anxiety, the perfectly rational fear about climate change that affects millions, gets transformed in wellness culture into recommendations for personal mindfulness practice and stress management techniques. Instead of channeling this anxiety toward collective climate action, environmental organizing, or systemic change, the wellness industry offers you meditation apps to help you cope with climate grief, breathing techniques to manage ECO anxiety, and mindfulness practices to find peace with environmental destruction. The problem itself, the actual environmental crisis, remains completely unaddressed while your emotional response to the crisis becomes a market opportunity. Research from the American Psychological Association consistently shows that the primary drivers of anxiety and depression in modern society are economic insecurity, social isolation, and powerlessness over life conditions. Yet, the wellness industry systematically avoids addressing any of these structural factors. Instead, it offers you yoga classes to manage work stress rather than labor organizing to address exploitative working conditions. It sells you supplements for anxiety rather than supporting policies that would provide economic security. It promotes gratitude practices to help you accept your circumstances rather than collective action to change those circumstances. This individualization serves a specific economic function within the neoliberal framework that Friedman championed. By transforming systemic problems into individual market opportunity, the wellness industry creates what economists call positive externalities for existing power structures. Your personal wellness practice doesn't threaten corporate power, doesn't challenge wealth inequality, doesn't demand policy changes, and doesn't organize collective resistance. Instead, It channels your dissatisfaction into consumer behavior that actually strengthens the very system creating your problems. The psychological research on this dynamic is particularly revealing. Studies show that when people are encouraged to focus on individual solutions to collective problems, they become less likely to engage in collective action, less supportive of systemic change, and more accepting of structural inequalities. The wellness industry doesn't just fail to address root causes, it actively reduces your motivation to address root causes. This isn't an accidental side effect. It's the predictable result of applying market logic to human suffering. You can observe this mechanism operating in your own life by noticing how wellness consistently point inward rather than out. When you're stressed about student loan debt, the wellness response is meditation, not debt forgiveness advocacy. When you're anxious about healthcare costs, the wellness response is yoga, not universal healthcare organizing. When you're depressed about job insecurity, the wellness response is gratitude journaling, not labor union membership. Every single time, the arrow of attention and energy gets redirected from collective solutions toward individual consumption. The second mechanism operates through what I call the commodification converter, the process by which basic human needs and natural healing practices are transformed into market products that require ongoing consumption. Milton Friedman argued that market mechanisms could efficiently allocate resources to meet human needs. But what actually happens under this logic is that human needs become market dependency, natural healing becomes intellectual property, and traditional community practices become branded individual products. This conversion process operates through several predictable stages you can observe across the wellness industry. First, practices that were traditionally free and community-based get identified as market opportunities. Meditation, which has been freely shared across cultures for thousands of years, becomes subscription-based meditation apps. Herbal medicine, which was traditionally shared knowledge within communities, becomes proprietary supplement formulation. Movement practices that were naturally integrated into daily life become expensive fitness class memberships and personal training sessions. The research on this commodification reveals its systematic psychological effects. When traditional healing practices become market products, several things happen simultaneously. The practices become isolated from their cultural context, which often provided the social support that made them effective. They become individualized rather than communal, which eliminates the collective healing that was central to their original function. They become expensive rather than accessible, which creates economic barriers that actually increase stress and anxiety for many people. And they become dependent on ongoing consumption rather than self-sufficient practice, which creates psychological dependency rather than empowerment. Consider how this operates with something as basic as stress relief. Traditional societies manage stress through community ritual, collective support system, seasonal rhythms, and economic security provided through social structures. The commodification converter transforms this into individual products purchase, stress relief apps, anxiety supplement, relaxation devices, meditation cushion, aromatherapy products, and wellness retreats. The original social and economic foundations of well-being get completely ignored while the symptoms get turned into purchasing opportunities. This commodification serves multiple functions within the broader neoliberal framework. It transforms free practices into profit streams, which creates economic incentives to maintain the conditions that create the need for these practices. It individualizes healing, which prevents collective healing and collective resistance. It creates ongoing dependencies, which generates repeat customers rather than empowered communities. And it makes wellness contingent on purchasing power, which means that economic inequality becomes health inequality, reinforcing the very system that creates illness in the first place. You can recognize this converter operating when you notice how wellness is consistent require ongoing consumption rather than building lasting capacity. Real healing practices, when learned properly, make you more self-sufficient over time. Market-based wellness products, by contrast, are designed to create ongoing dependency. The ABP keeps you coming back for more content. The supplements require continuous repurchasing. The classes require ongoing attendance. And the programs promise results that always seem to require the next level of consumption. The third mechanism functions as what I call the distraction distributor, a systematic process that channels legitimate political energy into harmless personal practice. This mechanism operates through the core Friedmanian principle that individual choice is more effective than collective action, redirecting your natural impulse towards social change into individual consumer choices that feel meaningful but create no structural change whatsoever. This distribution process works by offering you activities that provide the psychological satisfaction of taking meaningful action without any of the actual power to create meaningful change. You feel like you're doing something important for the world when you choose organic products, when you practice loving-kindness meditation, when you attend wellness workshops focused on healing trauma, when you participate in gratitude challenges, or when you follow spiritual teachers who promote individual enlightenment as the path to world peace. These activities provide genuine psychological rewards. They create real feelings of purpose and connection, and they can provide authentic personal benefit, which is precisely what makes them such effective distractions from activities that could actually challenge power structures. Research from political psychology demonstrates how this distraction mechanism operates at the neurological level. When people engage in activities that feel meaningful and purposeful, their brains release the same neurotransmitters that are released during actual social action and political engagement. The satisfaction of personal wellness practice can literally substitute for the satisfaction of collective organizing, creating what researchers call moral license, where people feel they've already done their part for social good through individual action that have no collective impact. The wellness industry systematically exploits this psychological mechanism by positioning personal transformation as equivalent to or even superior to social transformation. You're told that healing your personal trauma will heal the world's trauma, that raising your individual consciousness will raise collective consciousness, that finding your inner peace will create world peace, and that optimizing your personal energy will optimize planetary energy. These messages sound profound and feel meaningful, but they function as sophisticated forms of political sedation. This distraction serves specific economic functions within the neoliberal system. By channeling political energy into personal practices, it prevents the formation of collective movements that could challenge wealth concentration, corporate power, or systemic exploitation. By positioning individual transformation as the path to social change, it eliminates demands for policy changes, regulatory reforms, or redistributive economic policies. By making people feel they're already contributing to positive change through personal wellness, it reduces support for actual social change initiatives. You can observe this distributor operating in your own life by paying attention to how much time, energy, and money you spend on personal wellness compared to collective action. Notice how wellness culture consistently positions individual healing as more important, more effective, and more spiritual than political organizing. Notice how it suggests that working on yourself is always the right answer, regardless of external circumstances. Notice how it implies that if everyone just worked on themselves, social problems would automatically resolve. The fourth mechanism operates as what I call the inequality amplifier, a process through which wellness culture not only fails to address social inequalities, but actively reinforces and amplifies them. This mechanism directly implements Friedman's belief that market outcomes reflect individual merit, using wellness culture to suggest that health disparities, economic disparities, and life outcome disparities all result from individual choices around self-care, personal development, and wellness practice. This amplification process works by consistently implying that people who are struggling with health, finances, or life circumstances are simply not doing enough personal development work. If you're anxious, you need more meditation. If you're depressed, you need better self-care practices. If you're financially stressed, you need more abundance mindset training. If you're experiencing discrimination, you need more self-love work. If you're dealing with systemic oppression, you need higher vibration practices. Every form of suffering gets reframed as a personal development opportunity rather than a social justice issue. The research on wellness culture and inequality reveals how this amplification operates in practice. People with higher incomes have greater access to wellness resorts, from expensive organic food to high-end fitness classes to luxury retreat experiences. This creates what researchers call compound wellness inequality, where economic advantages translate into health advantages, which then get attributed to superior personal choices rather than superior economic resources. Meanwhile, people with lower incomes, who are dealing with the stress of economic insecurity, are told that their financial problems result from limiting beliefs, scarcity mindset, or insufficient gratitude practice. This creates a particularly insidious form of victim blaming that operates through wellness language. Instead of acknowledging how systemic racism affects health outcomes, wellness culture promotes colorblind approaches that attribute health disparity to individual lifestyle choices. Instead of recognizing how economic inequality creates stress and illness, wellness culture suggests that financial stress results from personal blocks around receiving abundance. Instead of understanding how discrimination and oppression create trauma, Wellness implies that trauma responses result from insufficient personal healing work. The psychological research on this dynamic shows how wellness culture actually increases shame and self-blame among people who are struggling with structural disadvantages. When systemic problems are consistently reframed as personal development opportunities, people begin to internalize responsibility for circumstances that are largely beyond their individual control. This internalization actually worsens mental health outcomes while reducing support for collective solutions to structural problems. You can recognize this amplify operating when you notice how wellness culture consistently offers individual explanations for collective problems. Health disparities become lifestyle choice disparities. Economic inequality becomes mindset inequality. Social discrimination becomes self-love deficit. Environmental illness becomes personal sensitivity issues. Educational inequality becomes limiting belief problems. Every single structural disparity gets reframed as an individual development opportunity, which reinforces the very inequality that create the need for wellness solutions in the first place. The fifth mechanism functions through what I call the liberation simulator, a sophisticated system that provides the psychological experience of freedom and empowerment while maintaining actual powerlessness and systemic control. This mechanism draws directly from Friedman's rhetorical conflation of market freedom with human freedom, offering you consumer choices in the wellness marketplace as a substitute for actual choices about the social and economic conditions that determine your life circumstances. This simulation operates by providing you with an endless array of wellness choices that feel meaningful and empowering while ensuring that none of these choices actually challenge the structures that limit your real freedom. You can choose between thousands of meditation apps, but you can't choose to have economic security. You can choose between hundreds of self-help approaches, but you can't choose to have affordable healthcare. You can choose between dozens of spiritual frameworks, but you can't choose to have housing stability. You can choose between countless personal development programs, but you can't choose to have democratic control over your workplace conditions. The liberation simulator works by creating what psychologists call the illusion of choice, where having multiple options within a constrained system creates the psychological experience of freedom while maintaining systemic control. Research shows that when people have multiple consumer choices within a limited framework, they experience greater satisfaction and feel more free, even when their actual power and autonomy remain severely constrained. The wellness industry exploits this psychological mechanism by offering you enormous choice within the personal development marketplace, while ensuring that the marketplace itself never becomes a choice. This simulation serves multiple functions within the broader neoliberal control system. It channels your natural desire for freedom and autonomy into consumer behavior that strengthens the very system that constrains your freedom. It provides psychological satisfaction that reduces your motivation to seek actual autonomy and actual power. It creates the feeling that you're actively choosing your life circumstances, which reduces support for systemic changes that could provide real choices. And it positions market consumption as the primary expression of human freedom, which reinforces the ideological foundations of the system. You can observe this simulator operating by paying attention to how wellness culture defines freedom and empowerment. Freedom becomes the ability to choose your response to circumstances rather than the ability to change circumstances. Empowerment becomes personal transformation rather than collective power. Liberation becomes individual enlightenment rather than social liberation. Autonomy becomes self-optimization rather than democratic control. Every definition of human fulfillment gets redirected toward individual consumer activities that leave existing power structures completely intact. The research on this psychological dynamic reveals why the liberation simulator is so effective. When people feel they're making meaningful choices, even within severely constrained systems, they experience greater life satisfaction and less political motivation. The wellness marketplace provides endless opportunities for choice making that feel significant and empowering, which satisfies the psychological need for autonomy while preventing the development of actual autonomy through collective organization and systemic change. The sixth mechanism operates as what I call the guilt generator, a systematic process that transforms legitimate anger about social injustice into personal shame about individual inadequacy. This mechanism implements Friedman's core assumption that individual outcomes reflect individual merit, using wellness culture to suggest that if you're still struggling with stress, anxiety, depression, or life dissatisfaction after engaging with wellness practices, the problem must be with your level of commitment, your mindset, or your personal blocks rather than with systemic conditions or structural limitations. This generation process works by setting up impossible standards for personal wellness, while positioning any failure to meet these standards as evidence of insufficient personal development work. You're told that if you were really committed to your healing, you wouldn't still be anxious about money. If you had truly released your limiting beliefs, you would have manifested financial abundance. If you were genuinely practicing self-love, you wouldn't be affected by discrimination or social rejection. If you had really done your trauma work, you wouldn't still be triggered by injustice and exploitation. The psychological research on this dynamic reveals how the guilt generator actually worsens the mental health outcomes it claims to improve. When people are taught that their emotional responses to legitimate problems indicate personal failure rather than rational responses to problematic circumstances, they develop what psychologists call learned helplessness and internalized oppression. Instead of feeling empowered to address external problems, they become focused on fixing internal problems that are actually rational responses to external problems. This guilt generation serves specific social control functions within the neoliberal framework. By making people feel personally responsible for systemic failure, it reduces criticism of existing systems and increases self-criticism instead. By positioning continued struggle as evidence of personal inadequacy, it prevents collective identification with others who are struggling with similar systemic problems. By suggesting that proper wellness practice should eliminate all negative emotion, it pathologizes natural human responses to unnatural social. You can recognize this generator operating when you notice how wellness culture responds to ongoing difficulties or social concerns. If you mention financial stress, the response focuses on your money mindset rather than economic policies. If you express concern about social issues, the response focuses on your need to raise your vibration rather than addressing the issues themselves. If you continue experiencing mental health challenges despite wellness practices, the response focuses on what you must still need to heal rather than acknowledging the role of ongoing stressful circumstances. The research shows that this guilt generation creates what psychologists call compound trauma, where the original stress or trauma gets compounded by shame about not healing properly or quickly enough. People begin to feel bad about feeling bad, anxious about being anxious, and depressed about being depressed. This creates psychological spirals that are much more difficult to address than the original problem, while ensuring continued dependence on wellness products and services. The seventh and final mechanism functions as what I call the policy substitution system, the process through which individual wellness practices become substitutes for collective social policies that could actually address the root causes of widespread mental health. This mechanism represents the ultimate expression of Friedman anti-government ideology, replacing public solutions to public problems with private solutions that individuals must purchase in the market. This substitution operates by consistently offering personal practices as alternatives to social policies, individual solutions as substitutes for collective solutions, and market-based approaches as replacements for democratically determined public programs. Instead of mental health care as a public right, you get meditation apps as individual purchases. Instead of economic security as social policy, you get abundance mindset training as personal development. Instead of environmental protection as collective action, you get detox programs as individual cleansing. Instead of workplace democracy as labor organizing, you get stress management as employee wellness program. The policy substitution system works by making individual wellness practices seem not just equivalent but superior to collective policy solutions. You're told that personal transformation is more powerful than political transformation, that individual healing is more effective than systemic change, that private solutions are more efficient than public programs, and that market-based approaches are more innovative than democratically planned alternatives. These messages position social policies as unnecessary, ineffective, or even harmful compared to individual wellness approaches. Research from public policy analysis reveals how this substitution actually worsens the problems it claims to address. When individual wellness practices replace collective policy, the underlying structural causes of mental health problems remain intact, while responsibility for managing the symptoms gets shifted to individuals who lack the resources or power to address root causes. This creates what researchers call policy displacement, where market solutions crowd out political solutions, leaving fundamental problems unsolved while creating the illusion of progress through individual improvement. This substitution serves crucial functions within the neoliberal control framework. By positioning individual practices as alternatives to collective policies, it reduces support for public programs that could actually address systemic problems. By suggesting that personal development is more effective than political development, it channels energy away from democratic organizing toward consumer activity. By making wellness contingent on individual purchasing power, it ensures that health outcomes remain linked to economic outcomes, reinforcing rather than challenging existing inequalities. You can observe this substitution system operating by noticing how wellness culture responds to social problems. Climate change becomes individual carbon footprint management rather than collective climate policy. Healthcare costs become personal wellness optimization rather than universal healthcare advocate. Economic inequality becomes individual abundance work rather than redistributive policy support. Educational disparities become personal mindset development rather than educational justice organizing. Every single social problem gets transformed into an individual development opportunity rather than a collective policy priority. The research on this psychological and political dynamic shows that policy substitution creates what political scientists call democratic atrophy, where people lose the skills, habits, and expectations of collective democratic participation because they've been trained to seek individual market solutions to collective social problems. This atrophy makes people less capable of engaging in the kinds of collective action that could actually address the root causes of the problems they're trying to solve through individual wellness practice. Now that you understand these 7 mechanisms through which the wellness industry functions as a system of social control, you can see clearly why no amount of personal wellness can solve problems that are fundamentally structural, and why the $40 billion wellness industry continues to grow even as anxiety, depression, and social problems continue to worsen. The industry isn't failing to deliver on its promises, it's succeeding at delivering exactly what it was designed to deliver under neoliberal economic principle: the transformation of collective problems into individual market opportunities, the channeling of political energy into consumer behavior, and the maintenance of existing power structures through the illusion of personal empowerment. The individualization engine ensures that systemic problems become personal responsibilities. The commodification converter transforms free community practices into expensive individual products. The distraction distributor channels political energy into harmless personal activities. The inequality amplifier reinforces social disparities through victim-blaming wellness narratives. The liberation simulator provides the feeling of freedom through consumer choice while maintaining actual powerlessness. The guilt generator creates shame about continued struggle despite wellness practice, and the policy substitution system replaces collective solutions with individual purchases. These mechanisms work together to create what I call the wellness trap, a sophisticated system that captures your legitimate desires for health, peace, meaning, and social connection, then redirects those desires toward individual consumer activities that strengthen the very system and the problems you're trying to solve. The trap is particularly effective because it provides real benefits, genuine community experiences, and authentic personal growth, which makes it difficult to recognize how it simultaneously prevents the collective action that could address root causes. But here's what the wellness industry doesn't want you to understand. You don't actually need to choose between personal well-being and social justice, between individual healing and collective action, between inner peace and outer change. This false choice is itself a product of the neoliberal framework that benefits from keeping these approaches separate and positioning alternatives rather than complementary approaches to human flourishing. Real well-being, the kind that's sustainable and satisfying over the long term, actually requires both personal practices and social conditions that support health, both individual healing and collective healing, both inner development and outer change. You can maintain meditation practice and also organize for universal healthcare. You can work on personal trauma and also work on social trauma. You can practice gratitude and also demand justice. You can optimize your individual health and also fight for environmental protection. You can pursue spiritual development and also pursue economic democracy. The key is recognizing that personal practices without social action leave root causes intact, while social action without personal practices often leads to burnout and reproduces the same patterns in new systems. The most effective approach combines individual wellness practices that build your capacity for sustained action, collective organizing that addresses the structural sources of widespread suffering. This means choosing wellness practices that connect you to community rather than isolate you from community. It means choosing approaches that increase your capacity for collective action rather than substitute for collective action. It means choosing practices that help you understand social problems more clearly rather than distracting you from social problems. It means choosing wellness investments that support local communities and social justice organizations rather than corporate wellness brands that extract wealth from communities. Most importantly, it means recognizing that your personal well-being and collective well-being are fundamentally interconnected, that individual healing and social healing happen together, and that the most profound personal transformation often emerges through the process of working collective to create social transformation. The wellness industry profits from your isolation, your individualism, and your belief that you can solve systemic problems through personal consumer choices. But you have the power to reclaim wellness practices for their original purpose, building individual and collective capacity for creating social conditions that support everyone's well-being, not just the well-being of people who can afford expensive wellness products. Your anxiety about the future, your stress about economic insecurity, your grief about environmental destruction, and your anger about social injustice are not problems to be managed through individual wellness practices. They are rational responses to real problems that require collective solutions. The wellness industry wants to sell you inner peace as a substitute for social justice, but you can choose both inner peace and social justice, personal healing and collective healing, individual transformation and social transformation. The choice is yours. But now you understand clearly what you're actually choosing between: a $42 billion industry that profits from transforming your legitimate social concerns into individual purchasing opportunities, or a path that honors both your personal well-being and your social responsibility, both your individual healing and your collective power. The wellness industry has been selling you a false choice between inner peace and social justice, but the real choice is between wellness that serves corporate profits and wellness that serves human flourishing. Between individual practices that maintain systemic problems and individual practices that build collective capacity for systemic solutions. You deserve both inner peace and social justice, both personal healing and collective healing, both individual transformation and social transformation. The question isn't whether you'll choose wellness or social action, but whether you'll choose wellness practice that serve your individual development while supporting collective liberation, or whether you'll continue investing in a wellness industry that uses your individual development to prevent collective liberation. The choice, as always, is yours. But now you can make that choice with full awareness of what you're actually choosing between.